of us in this country, and frankly around the world, is not an ideological spectrum, but an economic spectrum. The haves at the top and the have-nots, with which most of us are, right? He understood that fundamentally. So when he would go down and talk to people like my father-in-law, a corn and bean farmer down in southern Minnesota, and he would go up and talk to an iron miner up on the Iron Range or an immigrant in the inner city, he had the same message, and it was an economic populist message. The idea and the fundamental tenets of it being that everyone should have access to affordable health care wherever they live, no matter how much money they have. Everyone, no matter where they live or where they're from, should have access to a good quality education. Everyone who works hard should be paid a living wage and have a retirement so they can retire with dignity. This, at the core of it, was a populist economic bread and butter platform that we as Democrats believe in, right? And that he understood that those are the things that connect these very disparate groups. You would say, well, what does a farmer have in common with someone in North Minneapolis or someone on the Iron Range? That's what connects people, is this sense that if they work hard and play by the rules, that they can build a better life for their family. Now we know some of that is not true, that there are barriers to opportunity that exist, particularly for communities of color in this state and this country. We recognize that, right? But the idea here is that no one, regardless of where they live, where they're from, what their race or ethnicity, who they love, should be denied those opportunities. That's what Paul understood. And so I think that we need to get back to framing through a moral lens, and we need to get back to talking about the things that unite people wherever they live in this country.
So Ken, I'm going to do one more question, and then I think we'll take some questions from the chat. And this question is more trying to get a lay of the land as we move on. You've studied this more than you think you did. You've got a really great grasp of all of this, and you've also been very helpful to us, getting us in front of the ASDC and being generally supportive of this in general, not just here but other places. What do you see as far, we're at this moment, in fact, Antonia is on this call, Colby Stocking and some others. We've formed an association of people who do framing training. We've got people from, I think, 7 states now, and we're actively looking for more. What do you think at the national level, because you're plugged into that, do you think there's support growing in the states and perhaps at the national level for understanding just how important this is for every activist and every organization?
Well, there certainly is within my organization, the ASDC, which I'm fortunate enough to lead. And, we were really grateful for George and Lisa and Julie and others to come out but Julie wasn't there. It was just you and Lisa, right?
Yes,
in Santa Fe. Yeah, in Santa Fe to visit with all the state party leaders. And many of them are still raving about that visit. And I will tell you, George, the important thing is I think folks on the ground closest to the campaigns recognize the need for effective framing and really understanding this. And so I do think there's an appetite for it. I will tell you one of the things that concerns me, if I'm speaking very frankly about our national party, and I'm an officer, but the ecosystem in Washington, it's very much a beltway mentality. A lot of people make money off of the business of politics. High-priced consultants and media consultants and pollsters and messaging gurus and all these people who make a ton of money off of being right. Most of the time they're wrong. And they have no interest in really arming people with information that can make them more effective messengers because they make so money trying to give us the answers. And I say that not to be flip about it, but I think there is a lot of truth to it, which is there's this consultancy class that really makes so many of these decisions. And oftentimes, as I said, they're wrong. It's not to say we don't need people like that in the ecosystem, we do. But what I'd rather have us do is if we spend a fraction of the money we do in putting TV ads on on TV, on training people in effective framing and messaging, we would, even just a fraction, George. You know how much I think Joe Biden spent over $1 billion, most of that on TV, right? Let's say we took $5 to $10 million and put you guys on the road and started giving people the tools they need. That's how we turn this thing around. And I'm not saying that to blow smoke up your, or make your head bigger. I'm saying that because we need more disciples like you, people who will believe in this, who are actually doing this work. That's where the rubber hits the road. So I don't know if it will catch on. I certainly hope it does, because the more, what's that saying? You can teach a man what's that saying about fishing? It's from the
You can give
Bible.
a man a fish
Yes,
and he eats for a day. You can teach him to fish, he eats for a lifetime. I
that's
believe it's
exactly.
biblical. Yeah.
That's right. I mean, that's the parable we need here, which is we need to teach people to be their own best messenger and their own effective messengers. And the more people we can teach to do that, the better.
Yeah, indeed. That is great. Let's take some questions from the chat. Lisa,
Okay.
did you have some?
Yes. First of all, I just want to point out to everybody, please, if you can, look at the chat. There's a lot of great comments in there. I've been pulling out a few questions that have come through the chat. There's also links to things. So, and at the end, if you know how to save your chat, it's like there's usually at the bottom of the chat, at least on a laptop, there's like a little thing. It says and there's 3 little dots. Go in there and you can save your chat, and then you can go back and get some of this information. But we have a couple of questions here, and I'll start with the first one. Because Democrats govern when they take office, they make themselves vulnerable to being defined by Republicans. And I think it was because Democrats actually govern when they take office. So how can we better take command in defining ourselves and preventing the potshot taking that Republicans use so effectively to define us?
Well, first off, let me say that, and this isn't necessarily a messaging thing, but I believe that we do ourselves in when we get power and then we suddenly lose our spine. Someone said to me once that Republicans are shameless and Democrats are spineless. In 2012, I'll give you I'll share a story with you from right after that election. Of course, we had won. We beat both of those constitutional amendments. We had won both the majorities back in the legislative caucuses. Everyone was feeling really on cloud nine, right? And I remember meeting with Senator Bach and Representative Thiessen, Speaker Thiessen, right after, and the governor. It was the 4 of us, and there was a lot of talk in that meeting about not overreacting or overreaching, right? The word was overreach, because we didn't want to be the Republicans and overreach like they did by putting those amendments on the ballot and pushing their own agenda. And they kept talking about this, both Thiessen and Bach. We can't overreach, right? And after hearing this conversation, I said, look, the opposite of overreaching is doing nothing at all, right? If you do nothing, you're not going to win an election either. You have to if you do something positive for people and you do some good, they will reelect you. Too often than not, we get into a position where our elected officials who are elected, they don't use the power that they're given to make a difference for people. And so, let me say this. In 2013, a friend of mine, Joe Radinovich, I went into his office. He was a state rep at the time, and I was up there lobbying to DFLers to pass marriage equality. And even before I got into his office, the word must have gotten out that I was up there. And he said, you don't even have to talk to me about that issue because I'm going to vote for it. And he goes, but I can tell you right now, I'm going to lose my election because of it, but I don't care, because I'm going to leave this building with my head high, knowing that I did the right thing for this community. And he goes, how many times in your life can you actually say that you were able to change your state and country for the better? If we had more people like that in office, imagine how much further along we'd be, meaning that I think the reason we get defined is because we get up there and we forget why we were elected. Now, take the most recent debate on the minimum wage. For Christ's sake, excuse my language. I'm so frustrated about this, though. We we control both chambers of Congress and the White House. Why are we allowing the Republicans? I understand the filibuster. I understand all that stuff. But if we're not going to fight for minimum wage, what are we going to fight for? And this is how we allow ourselves to get defined, because we make these promises to voters, and then when we get up to office, we worry more about being reelected than we do about getting things done. We have to flip the switch. Let's worry more about getting things done. And then if we get defeated, so be it. At least we've done something. Imagine 2 years from now, if we get booted out of Congress, if we've raised the minimum wage and we pass some good legislation to improve people's lives. Our country's better off for it. We're not better off just saving people's asses and keeping them in power. I say that as the chair of the DFL. I mean, I think all of you could agree we're done with electing people who won't use the power they have to make a difference in people's lives. That's going back to Wellstone. Paul would always stand up and fight for people. We need more people in office who will do that. And I know that's not completely answering your question, but I think that's the solution. We don't get defined by the Republicans. We define ourselves. They can say anything they want about us, but if we're standing up and delivering on the promises we made to the American people, they have no room to define us.
There's a great Harry Truman quote that I use in the workshops, and Harry Truman said, if you give people a choice between someone who acts like a Republican and a real Republican, they'll pick the real one every time. And I think that's pretty much what's happened. We've been afraid to put ourselves out there. And the weird thing is if you look at almost any major issue, if you don't put it in party terms and you just talk to people about, wouldn't it be great if you just had healthcare and never had to worry about it? They say yes, in huge numbers. Background checks, just about any other issue that you come across, people are way more with us than we think they are. And if we just put it in the right terms, we can pull them over. But we have to be brave enough to do it. I totally agree. What else? We have another question.
Yes. One question is, I keep hearing Walz is vulnerable. I first heard this from from Republicans, but now DFLers are saying it too. That might be bad framing. What might the key 2 or 3 pro Walz issues likely to be, and how do we frame them?
Well, I think that Democrats sometimes I'm trying to say the right word here without, we get a little panicked, right? And and I think we allow the Republicans to sort of play into these fears that aren't real. And I will tell you that part of what I would say right now, and this isn't necessarily framing it the right way, but the reason why I believe Governor Walz is in a good position is that, he's had to make a number of very difficult decisions in his time as governor. And frankly, in an unprecedented and historic situations that he's had to deal with, from the long overdue racial reckoning, and of course the unrest and of the economy that was collapsing, and of course the pandemic. He's had to make decisions to keep Minnesotans safe and to keep Minnesota on track, and to help deal with this long overdue, like I said, racial reckoning. And so I say that because at the end of the day, I do believe voters will give him credit for doing his part to keep Minnesotans safe. That said, there's a lot of people who are frustrated, and I think it's probably given an opportunity to Republicans to try to create discord within the state around the decisions that he's made. In the end, I think history and the state will judge Governor Walz kindly for the tough decisions he's made, because again, as he said to me, and I believe this is true, sometimes you have to throw politics aside and not worry about the tough decision. You'll live with the consequence, and the chips will fall where they may. And you have to live with yourself, knowing at the end of the day, you did everything you can to protect people in this state. That's his job as governor, and that's what he's doing right now. And I think people will give him credit for that.
And that could be like the protection frame that we talk about in our workshops. And that is what Governor Walz is doing. He's protecting us. And that is a big frame that we have.
And I'll just pop in and say, every single one of us needs to not buy into that and spend our time talking about what it is that Governor Walz has done to save this state from some pretty bad calamities, and just keep on that. You are under no obligation to respond to what the Republicans say. You do not have to counter everything, because that's what they want you to do. Because when you're countering them, you're in their frame. So get out of their frame, talk about the good that Governor Walz has done, and do this all the time. So I had another question.
Yep. Republicans have convinced the average greater Minnesota resident that Democrats are elitist and don't share their interests. How can we counter this frame?
You know, I would ask you guys for some ideas on this, but what I would say is it goes back to part of it's branding, and part of it is when certain issues are used against us. I'll take the law and order messaging, for example, that allow the party to be branded a certain way in the eyes of voters. To George's point, I'll use Colin Peterson as an example in the 7th district, right? There wasn't a lot of daylight between him and his opponent on the issues, right? They were both fairly conservative. And there wasn't a ton that I agreed with Colin Peterson on, to be honest with you, but he was a Democrat. But at the end of the day, what's interesting to me is that the DFL brand was so toxic in Western Minnesota, he ended up losing by 14 points to Michelle Fischbach. And the interesting thing in that district is Colin Peterson overperformed Joe Biden by the most of any congressional Democrat in this state. And Michelle Fischbach underperformed Donald Trump by the most of any Republican running for Congress in this state. Yet Colin Peterson still lost by 14 points. The reason I say that is because there's something happening with our brand in certain parts of this state that is toxic. They could agree with you on every issue. You could be completely in agreement to George's point. Many people are on critical issues, but they voted against him because he had the DFL next to his name. I think that's part of what's happening here. So in terms of the elitism message and the fact that Democrats don't care about greater Minnesota, I think, we could talk all day until we're blue in the face about how we've done more for greater Minnesota than the Republicans, how we're fighting for, rural broadband, how we're fighting for rural health clinics, how we're fighting for local government aid, how we're fighting for, farmers and for agriculture. We could go down the list, how we're fighting for climate and the environment, all of these issues that people in greater Minnesota care about, transportation and roads and bridges and infrastructure, you name it, right? That's not going to convince people that we're standing up and fighting for them, right? And so again, it goes to something deeper here, which is a feeling about the Democratic Party and the DFL. And that's why I come back to the brand, because I think what people confuse again is they think if only they heard certain things out of our mouth, if only they heard us standing up and fighting for them, or talking about the issues they care about. That's one step in this, right? But the other step is to make sure that they know that we're their champion and that we are going to fight for them. And so let me say it another way. And some of you have heard me say this before. In 2012, I was one of the founding board members for Minnesotans United for All Families. And during that campaign, I had the good fortune of sitting down with Governor Wendy Anderson. And I asked Wendy, how do you think gay marriage is going to play in greater Minnesota? And he said, you know what, folks in greater Minnesota are good people. They don't mind if you're fighting for the poor, or you're fighting for communities of color, or you're fighting for immigrants, or even if you're fighting for gay marriage. But if they feel like you've forgotten them, they're going to leave you. Again, this is a values and a feeling, right? People feel like we forgot them because they don't hear us talking about family farmers anymore. They don't hear us really truly saying we're going to fight for people wherever they live, right? Again, I can't overstate enough that so much of our brand is tied to this feeling that people have and not some sort of magic set of issues that we need to run on. And that's why framing matters, because framing elicits a certain emotion in people's minds. And if you're using the wrong frame, you've already lost them, right? So I know that didn't completely answer your question, but that's what I feel the path forward is not necessarily coming up with 20 great bullet points or talking points about how we're going to work hard for folks in greater Minnesota. It's less what we say and what we do. And what we do means when we're in power, we got to start doing things for folks in greater Minnesota.
And maybe take that page out of Jane Klebb's book, because that book is all about her going out and meeting people. Now, it would be great if you do that, if you're a metro person or a city person in this state or any other, and you go out to rural areas and get to know people. But it's also really, really important to support our DFL brothers and sisters who are out in greater Minnesota, who are doing this work, and who know the people. We need to support them. We need to know their issues. We need to be part of it. This can't be something that we don't think about anymore. And if we do that, people in our party and outside our party will know that we care. Those of you who've taken our workshop know that one of our final exercises is the I care statement. We have you put first in the message that you make why it is that you care about this issue, because we want it to come from you, from your heart, from your experience or experiences of people that you know personally, so that you are authentic. But if we always come across as authentically caring about people wherever they are, but especially if we hope to win presidential races in the future, we must spend that time and we must support people in our greater Minnesota DFL groups and in any state you're in. Find those people who are your rural caucus, get to know them, and do what needs to happen.
George, another book I wanted to recommend is a book called The Politics of Resentment, and it's by Dr. Catherine Kramer, a professor at the University of Wisconsin. She studied the 2016 Trump voter in rural Wisconsin. And what's really interesting is it sort of goes back to what I just said again about people feeling forgotten and left behind, right? And I agree completely with Linda Larson's comments in the chat, by the way, about people in greater Minnesota feeling resourceful and resilient. There's no doubt that that's true. And I use my father-in-law, though, as an example of both what Linda said and Dr. Kramer in her book, The Politics of Resentment, because, you know, I think about his life. He's 88 years old, 800 acres of corn and beans and beef cattle down in southern Minnesota. And I will tell you what's happening around him that gives him anxiety in his life, right? His high school is no longer there because they consolidated with other high schools around. So now the high school he went to and my wife went to and their whole family went to is no longer there. There's a sense of community identity that is no longer there. His parish, the Catholic church I was married at, right down in Easton, it's there, but they rotate their masses now between three parishes, and they have to drive every Sunday to a different parish. So they're feeling a sense of loss of community there, right? There's not as many jobs on Main Street, so their grocery store is closed down. The clinic, which my mother-in-law goes to for Parkinson's, they have to drive further. Why does all that matter? Because there's a sense of abandonment. There's a sense of loss of identity. There's a sense of nostalgia. And what do I mean by that? And along comes Donald Trump, promising coal miners in West Virginia he's going to bring coal back, promising people like my father-in-law he's going to bring back that vibrant, thriving, small rural town that he grew up with. Now, when he says make America great again, we all know it was never great, and we all know we don't want to go back to those times because it didn't work for everyone. But to people who are like my father-in-law, feeling nostalgic and left behind, again, that's a feeling. That's a brand. That's not a bunch of issues. There's nothing Donald Trump said underneath of that gave anyone any sense that things were going to be better, but he tapped into their feelings, their emotions. That's what I'm trying to convey here. At the end of the day, this is the missing piece because, again, we want to be right. So we want to educate voters. And by educating them, we use stats and facts and we have a long list of policy. Well, guess what? That flies over people's head because they want to hear about how it's going to impact their lives and their community. How are we going to make it better for me and my community? I know that sounds so goofy and maybe even oversimplifying it. It probably is oversimplifying, but I'll tell you, until we start talking through that lens, we're never going to win some of those folks back.
I can tell you that what you just said is absolutely backed up by the science. And so we as Democrats have to stop being science deniers about this. We must read the science and see how people's brains work. And they work exactly how Ken just said. That's important. I should also bring up that the question was about the elitist thing, and understand that what's happening there is a very common trick, and it's almost a core policy of message making on the right, and that's projection. So what they try to do is blunt what they're doing by accusing us of doing it. I call it the I know you are, but what am I defense. And so what happens is they paint us as being elitist. Why? Because on the right, and long as we're recommending books, another one out now, Evil Geniuses by Kurt Anderson, great book. They, for a half a century now, have set out with a very small group of very rich people to take over not only the government, but the markets and also people's brains. They studied this science 50 years ago. They've been studying it all along. They're the elitists. And so even though they're saying we're elites, I think we can certainly say the corporate elites, or the if you Club for Growth or whatever it is, but the wealthy 0.01% are the elites that control our government, and they've won. And we need to take this back for us. And it's okay to turn that around on them, and take that part of it back. Do we have another question? We're at 8 o'clock
right now. And there are a few more questions, but we did say this was going to end at 8. So Ken, I just want, you can look in the chat for questions. I also want to say that some of the questions that have been asked are they're generic questions about framing in general. And please feel free to go to our website to get resources on the concepts of framing and messaging in general. And you are now on our mailing list if you weren't before, so you will be getting emails from us about workshops that we're going to have, or if you have a group that you feel would benefit from a workshop, please contact us. Like I said, I'll be sending out information tomorrow about how you can do that. And Ken, do you have any closing remarks?
No, I mean, I could stay on for another hour. I really enjoyed this conversation, honestly.
Somebody wants us to stay on for another 6 hours, but that might be a little long.
Well, how about we do this again?
Yeah, I'd love to come back. And one of the things I would say is, I know a lot of you have heard me say this, but there's a plaque that sits right over here by my desk that used to hang above Rudy Perpich's office when he was governor, that says none of us are as smart as all of us. So, I don't think any of us have all the answers on this, right? But collectively, when we put our minds together, we can figure this stuff out. I really, truly believe it. I will say, though, that one of the things that George and Lisa are offering up here is really important to learn how to effectively frame the message and to speak more through that values lens and to be on the offense, not on the defense, right? Don't allow the Republicans or the conservatives to frame the debate. You go on the offense and frame it the way that you need to. Again, there's no trick to this. There's not one page that George can offer up to you that's going to give you the answer on everything, because this is really sort of learning how to incorporate this into everything you do as you're having conversations with folks. The last thing I would leave is that framing is important, but it's not the only piece. The other piece of this is to recognize that we have to be willing to have tough conversations, right? And sometimes that means getting outside of your comfort zone and having that conversation with like my brother, who's a union carpenter up in Isani, who is a big Trump supporter, right? And having a conversation sometimes with the ones that are closest to you is really hard to do, but those are the most important conversations because you're the best validator. And so you could be the most effective messenger, but if you're not talking to the people who need to hear that message, then it doesn't really matter. And the last thing I'll say is don't just preach to the choir. You're all converted, right? We're all in the same church right now, and that's the Church of Progressive Democratic Values, right? Let's preach to the people that need to hear this. Let's be evangelists to people outside of our party. And I'm not talking Republicans, although we should talk to some Republicans, but I'm talking to all those people who don't feel like they're a DFLer for whatever reason, but their economic condition and their life condition and everything else about them says that they should be part of our Democratic Party. That's who we need to be preaching to with our values. So anyways, I appreciate all of you. George, this has been awesome. I love it. I've been doing a lot of these Zooms for the last few weeks, but this has been really fun. So thank you very much.
Thank you. This has been great. And we really appreciate it. It's I think everyone's getting something out of it. We will also make I've noticed that there's so much good stuff going on in the chat that I think we'll make the chat available to people. I had intended to record this and forgot, and so only got it about halfway. So I don't know that this will go up, but we'll let you know if it does. And other than that, remember that wherever you are in Minnesota or in the US, we will do one thing that we like to do is do this kind of training for a group, because if we've got your local group together learning this together, now you have a local culture that understands what this is about. And together you can check yourselves, you can practice, and you can push this forward. So we do that, and give us a call, let us know. Ken has been very kind to help us move this along. And so just let us know, call us, and we don't care where you are, and we'll go for it. And the association we put together, and that we're beginning to grow now, we also can find people in other parts of the US who have this ability and will be able to come out and do this. So I think this has been great. I could go for another 6 hours, but we'll let you get some sleep, and we'll do this again soon.
Thank you so much, Ken.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Ken.
Good night.
Bye, everybody. Thank you.
All right. Bye.
Thanks so much.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks. You want to end the?
Not yet.
Oh, okay.
Save the chat first.
Thank you. Awesome meeting.
Oh,
Thank you very
thanks.
much, everybody.
Thanks.
Thanks, George and Lisa.
Bye, Ginny.
Ah,
Here's Jane.
excellent, excellent.
Thank you.
Hi, Dave.
Ken, something else, huh?
connectionslab.org.